You're welcome again to Searching the Heart. This evening, I'm going to be talking about something very peculiar topic. Although this topic is actually linked to so many things. Okay, like I was just looking through my video on pitfalls of necromancy. I discovered that this very topic is also part of the pitfalls of necromancy. The practice of necromancy creates the desire to see, to create some kind of parity among people. Okay, and the topic today is about the politics of unity. The politics of unity. Of course, we all want unity. We believe that when we're united at a point in time, many people feel when they are able to create a system that has a diversity that is united, there will be progress. And of course, in Nigeria here, the talk has always been about unity. I know as a Christian, the talk is always about unity. And whatever tribal group you belong to, there's always talk of unity for the sake of progress. Okay? Whatever family, whatever association, there's always talk of unity. And so it is important. Unity becomes an important thing. But I want to talk about the politics of unity. And I hope that as we look through the politics of unity, we're able to know what are those things that actually stand against the proper practice of unity, and what are those things that actually help unity. So we'll be looking at that today. Okay, and before I go into the solutions, okay, those concepts, let us begin with something very, very interesting. Okay, now first of all, okay, before I get to that, there are issues that come up in the practice of unity, and this issue of the gospel, what I call the gospel of sharing, is a very important issue. People believe that unity is for the sake of sharing. Okay, unity is for the sake of sharing, because of course there's no nation, no tribe, no religion that exists just for the sake of it, except for religion itself. Religion that is actually separated from tribe exists without any resource foundationally at the basis of it. Okay, it feasts on just a communal reliance on something that really may be not very substantial, sometimes because of a miracle, sometimes because of a culture that backs it up. But right now, the emphasis would be on the absence of such a culture, or a culture that has a resource backing it up. Okay, so religion is one thing that actually exists without any resource, or any proper sharing of any resource. That is why religion has been for centuries and centuries the backbone of any society, and the whole motive behind it is to create unity. Okay, is to create unity. So, but in the 21st century, it is very different. In the 21st century, what we have is mainly nations that rely on a multiplicity of resources to keep themselves together because of their shared identity. And so, okay, they remain thus united because of these shared resources. And if they are to be divided, of course, you know that probably the resources will be the reason why they become divided. Okay? So the gospel of shared resources is one of the major backbones of the reason for unity, or a catalyst for unity. Okay? Shared resources. But there has come up an issue over, a peculiar issue over the time that I have studied this very phenomenon. and I've discovered the gospel of forced sharing of resources. Okay, of forced sharing of resources. Why? I have come to discover an issue, and the issue is that because of the scarcity of resources, there is a tendency for people to just push for unity just because a perceived resource is available. Okay, people tend to gather. I've done a video on this also, a video titled Gathering Around Resources. I was able to look at the positives and the negatives. If there's a resource, if people gather around such a resource, what does it create? Okay, we're able to look at that and see that it is human nature to gather around resources. And sometimes there are a group of people that preach a unity behind a forced sharing of resources. Okay, and this is one thing that we can say is artificial unity. Okay, it does not have any basis on it. Does not for the first consider the practicability, the science behind this sharing of resources. Okay, there is no science behind it. It is just, first of all, put there on the public fora. This resource can be shared and should be shared in the name of the community. And mostly, this is the foundation of so many socialist economies. Okay, so this gospel of forced sharing of resources is one of the popular means by which people try to push for unity. Okay, now what are the points of unity sharing? Let us look at those issues that come up when you talk about sharing of resources. Okay, of course, we've already talked about unity through resource. If there's a resource, people share it. Sometimes, unfortunately, this resource is not really substantial. Okay, it's not really a resource that you can physically obtain and sell in the market. It is not a resource for trade, and so it is limited. How you can share it is very limited, or even sometimes not possible at all. Okay, because that resource is not a physical resource. It's not something you can mine from the earth and sell. It's not an agricultural resource. You cannot grow it and multiply it and then sell. And so on and so forth. Sometimes it is a human resource, and the human resource, of course, human beings can only bring out labor, physical labor or mental labor. Okay, and so this is what it is. So it is limited. How you can share such a resource is limited. Okay, far more limited than the resources that can be mined, can be grown, can be harvested, physically harvested. Okay, so these are the issues. So the unity through human resource is very limited and could lead to slavery. Of course, like we have known, has happened so many times in history. Okay, and this has led to the rise of within the very context of slavery, of course, kidnapping and resource hijacking. Now I'm talking in this light in the context of the modern situation. Okay, historically, there has not been a time when people shared human resources. Okay, anything in that light would be akin to slavery. Of course, people actually being kidnapped, being who held under a kind of hostage arrangement for them to work forcibly for whoever is doing the kidnapping. And so resources are mainly resources that are shared are mainly physical resources, land, natural resources like the things that come out of the land, the trees, the forest resources, water resources, And this is basically what it is. And and it has continued like that and created our economies that as we have learned to share these resources and to create an economy behind these resources, in terms of trade, in terms of creating technology, in terms of learning how to manipulate these technologies, it has become a resource that has now created our modern economy. And most of these economies are not, the resources are not shared. They are bartered, okay? Bartered in the terms of buying and selling. And this is how the artificial economy was created. You have a resource, you are able to mass produce this resource, then you can sell it, and the other person who needs that resource will buy it in exchange for other resources. Okay, so this is just what it is. Very little of the resources we have, natural resources we have, are shared. They are scarcely shared. Sharing of resources leads. There is a limit. We have already established that. A limit to sharing of resources. Resources are mostly traded. They form the basis of the economy, of a trade economy, of a technology economy, and later on of a political economy. Okay, so this is what we need to understand. Okay, so because we have already said what the only resources that are available are natural resources and human resources, and natural resources can be shared, but human resources can hardly be shared, and this dichotomy creates some of these problems. Okay, so let's look at then the role of socialism and politicians in this whole idea of the politics of unity. What is the role of socialism and politicians? Now, politicians have been able over the millennia to create governments, okay, to find a solution to the issue of unity by creating governments. And how they create these governments is either by forcing people to share or by convincing the people to share. Now, in all these economies, sharing is the very foundation. It is very true that sharing is the foundation. One person has to agree first to take a particular portion of land and then move away, then the other person can have the other portion of land. And there is that boundary between them and say, okay, this is my boundary, this is your boundary. And in that sense, there's sharing for the first. And of course, to agree to even be part of a nation is sharing. Okay, it's already sharing. To say, okay, there are certain things that if they affect me, I will be there for you, and if they affect you, I mean, you will be there for me, and I will be there for you. You know, there's that kind of interdependence, and from the very foundation, it is sharing of resources. So politicians help to facilitate this sharing of resources, but they don't. Their job is not just to facilitate sharing of resources, and this is my focus for this very episode. The job of politicians is not just sharing of resources. The job of politicians is to ensure trade, fluidity of trade, fluidity of cooperation in terms of exchange of resources that cannot be shared. Okay, because it's not every resource that can be shared. Some resources have to be traded. Some resources, and this is what causes prosperity. Prosperity does not come from the sharing of resources and has never come from the sharing of resources. Prosperity was created from the exchange of resources through trade, which started from the barter system and then developed to the development of different forms of currency, whether metallic currency, commodity money, or the money that we have today, which is far more complicated. Okay, so this is just what we need to understand here. So politicians are very important, and there's another aspect like that I had mentioned from the beginning, which sometimes is taken for granted, and which is the religious powers. Okay, before politicians existed, there was the religion. The religion existed, and religion was that system that enabled the first humans to create these sharing, power sharing systems, resource sharing systems. And once they submitted under religion, the next step was monarchies. Monarchies came and they usurped the religions. They took over and became powerful, and they began to suppress the religions. And after the monarchies, democracies came in. Okay, sometimes it was not straight to democracy. Oligarchies, military powers took over that were not necessarily monarchies in some other systems. While in other systems, of course, democracy took over. And so this is how these things happen. So politicians helped, religious people or religions help, okay, to ensure equitable sharing and agreement of sharing of resources. This is the politics of unity. We'll look at one very important, one very peculiar scripture in the Bible, okay, and this is Isaiah 53, okay. First of all, there are two scriptures actually, Isaiah chapter 2 and Isaiah 53. So I'm going to look at that very briefly, just to give us an overview of what this is saying, okay, so that we can really discuss it by its own merits. So it says the word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it shall come to pass in the later days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He shall teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords to plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now we see a very interesting view on how unity is created. Okay, it says first of all, there will come up a house or a monarch or a king, and that monarch from a particular family in the world will be lifted by way of power. He will be given power, and he will be above every other power in the world. And people will come from all different nations of the world to be taught by him. Now we need to understand what the scripture is saying. First of all, there will be power in his hands because he will be a king and he will rule over a people. And every other nation around will submit to his power, will recognize his power. And it has happened before. Of course, this is a context where after King Solomon of Israel, okay, King Solomon was like that. He was uplifted, and nations around him all came to him to receive his wisdom. Okay, so this is very similar to what Isaiah is saying. And people will come and say, Come, let us go to the house of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways and we will walk in his paths. He will be a very wise person. He will teach. So unity is created through wisdom, okay, through knowledge. We can see it here, okay. And, okay, now because of his wisdom and knowledge, there will be peace. They will accept his wisdom because they accept his wisdom as a good wisdom. And so because of that, they will sheath their swords. When they believe that what he is telling them will help them to prosper, to survive, and they accept him as that leader, then they will sheath their swords. And they will even go to the extent of turning their swords to plowshares. They will now believe that, look, economy, to work, is better than to kill to earn, okay? To work in different, especially in agriculture, which was the predominant way of living then, was far better than going on raids, than killing another person and getting his property, okay? So they will sheath their swords, they will turn their swords to plowshares, okay? And from then, nation, it says what? Shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. There won't be any need to learn to fight. There won't be any need for war, for creating weapons and for war. So this is what this very scripture says, okay? Now we'll go to the next scripture, which talks of a similar thing, okay? Which is Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah chapter 53, okay? Isaiah 53. And what does it say here? Very interesting. We will see it just in a moment. It says what? It says, who shall believe our report, and whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, okay? And it says the same thing, okay? It says the same thing. And of course, again, another chapter here, which is chapter 11 of the same Isaiah, okay? Chapter 11 of the same Isaiah, and it says what? It says, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fairling together, and a little child shall lead them. Okay? So the same thing. It talks about peace. It talks about unity. There are no need for war and everything. And so this is what it talks about. Okay? And it talks from the vantage point of a leader who is wise, who is powerful, and who will facilitate this. We will look into this in more detail after this.
Discover a transformative journey into the kingdom of heaven. Following the initial publication, the author dives deeper with 2 insightful follow-up books. Ever felt disconnected from God even in worship? Explore how God's unconventional ways can transform your life. How can you align with divine plans, avoiding distractions? Find answers in The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth and The 3, Illuminating Christian Truths and Prophetic Practices. Unlock profound insights guiding you toward a deeper connection with God. Don't miss out. Dive into this enlightening exploration today. Click the link on the caption to get your copy.
So, we've seen what the Bible is saying from, the historical point of view, from the point of view of wisdom, on how unity is normally created, unity is normally achieved. Okay? And we see that, first of all, the concept of wisdom is there. Second, the concept of power is there. Okay? And thirdly, the concept of the acceptance of this wisdom and power from those who see the greatness of this power. It is very, very well known that all over the world, people tend to see when a system succeeds. And when they see a system succeeding, they want to identify with it. And we see it today in many of the nations of the world, okay? The ability of nations of the world to sustain governments over wide expanses of land and peoples and very, very dense population, and to spread this wisdom around the world. Okay, one of the countries that has been able to do that is Britain. A modern nation that have been able to do this is Britain, of course we know, mainly through force, through military power. Of course, we know Britain is no longer as powerful as it used to be. Another nation that's been able to do this is the United States of America, who also established their own power through military force over the very large space that they control, but were able to come into relevance through the Second World War, of course defeating another power, which was Germany and Japan. Okay, so they've held influence over the world since then. And we see, of course, there's that aspect that military force does come in, but the length through which these powers are sustained is another thing. Okay, we've seen the Soviet Union also over the centuries hold out, also through a lot of struggle, through a lot of war. Okay, but the issue is the ability to create a form of stability is one thing, but now to sustain it is another thing. And what sustains it, we see that creating it, of course, there is some form of military alliance and also economic alliance. These two things work together, economic and military alliance. And then sustaining it, there will be some kind of system of knowledge, okay, to sustain it. Education, a system of education to sustain it. We know the Brits created most of what we have today in terms of creating the United States of America, and of course with their own system of education and trade, capitalism. Of course, the Soviets created what they have through a monarchical system, of course, and then the communism they practiced. And these have, held sway in many parts of the world. Where, of course, also we cannot remove all these people from their links, their European links. So we know all these things, okay? And this is not far from what the Bible here is saying, okay? But we know that these are not perfect, okay? And like I said, I want to pinpoint today a very important issue that is coming up in the issue of the politics of unity. The world has also been able to save itself from major crises that have created all of these three world powers by creating what you call the United Nations. Okay, so the United Nations has been a force for unity, and through this unity, there has been peace. Okay, and through an acceptance of shared values. So we're still talking about the same thing: economic power, military power, then knowledge, shared values, wisdom, a system of wisdom, power, and knowledge that sustains that system. So three pillars here. Okay, military power, economic power, then what? A system of knowledge. Okay, wisdom that makes them to be able to sustain this system of power. Okay, so this is what we see happening, and this is what the Bible is saying here, especially in Isaiah chapter 2. It helps us to understand this. Okay, so how can we now relate this to what is going on in our time in this? What do I want to talk about? There is a rise in a philosophy. Some people call it the woke philosophy, okay? And I've done a video on this, the woke philosophy. But like I have said, this philosophy, the source of this philosophy is from a source which is actually unknown. It's not something you can pinpoint to. It has thrived in Africa for a while in response to colonialism, okay? Colonialism, sorry. So colonialism took place, we have to look at the context, first of all. It took place in a situation where the Western powers and the European powers were far more powerful militarily, okay, and economically than the forces in Africa, than the kingdoms in Africa. Okay, the only advanced power in sub-Saharan Africa was the Ethiopian monarchy at that time. Okay, and Africa was really a very weak place that had been exploited for centuries and centuries. And because of this, it created a kind of sympathy vote that when the Africans came to a point that the Africans started pushing for independence, and in their push for independence, they sought reparations. Even hundreds of years or decades after many of them have gotten independence, they started pushing for reparations. Reparations against slavery, okay, and reparations against colonialism itself, okay, because there was a feeling that a lot of the natural resources of Africa were used to create the great wealth and technology of the West. And so the system that was in operation, where the West was always ahead and Africa was always trying to catch up, was not desired. And this was a kind of woke philosophy. And it created a woke philosophy. And what is that woke philosophy? That from the point of disadvantage, okay, there's that concept of what? Affirmative action, okay? There's a concept of affirmative action. And affirmative action does not really promote merit, okay? It just says, because I am weak, I deserve this position. Because I have a right to this position or that position. Of course, we see affirmative action in so many other things, issues, discussions, gender discussions, and all that. And of course, it is coming into the racial discussion. So that is what is considered woke, the basis of what is considered woke. And it has really gotten into this modern world because of the very peculiar nature of our modern world. A modern world that has matured morally, okay? That third pillar, remember, based on knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, the third pillar is a world that has matured morally. And of course, there is no more that issue of a superior force, a moral superior force, versus a morally depraved force. And so that morally superior force will always be dominant. It is now understood that it is not always so, okay, as we have seen in so many civilizations that have fallen, even though they claim to be morally superior, like the Roman Empire, like the Russian Tsars, okay, they were toppled because at a point they lost their moral superiority, even though they claimed to be, and so many historical accounts that we can draw from. So this world that we live in is mature morally, okay? And so it has opened the way for this woke philosophy to come in. And this is the problem. In these very, very philosophies, we discover a particular politics of unity. And this politics of unity is forceful sharing of resources. Forceful sharing of resources. And this is what is at stake. And this is practiced under the banner of necromancy. Okay? It is assumed, because of this loss of superiority of modern philosophy, especially when you look at Christianity and also a lot of times Islam, there's a loss of the power that these religious models and intellectual models tend to give, and it has brought back the resurgence of necromancy. And this, in my understanding, this moral legitimacy comes from necromancy, and it encourages a kind of forceful sharing of resources. And we've seen it here in Nigeria in the form of rotational presidency, okay? Nigeria is a peculiar place. It has about 450 tribes. I've done a video on this. You can go back and look at this. Why Nigeria is so complicated. Okay, you will see what is in there. 450 tribes. And it is difficult to bring all these tribes together. There's another video on democracy. Okay, how Nigeria has developed to democracy, and why it's so difficult to establish democracy. So there's this feeling that people must be together. Okay, everybody wants to be independent, yet there's a need to come together and share resources. And in this kind of situation, you find that it's very difficult. And so there has been talk of federalism. And in this federalism, there's talk of rotational presidency, rotational, equitable sharing of resource. That means you have to make sure that every constituency is represented in the sharing of resources. Okay, but they talk about the federal character. Okay, and so this is what is done because first of all, capitalism has not been fully accepted in Nigeria, and capitalism is all about merit. It's all a merit. It works based on a meritocracy. If you are able to prove that your product is good, people come and they buy your product. Okay, and that is all. And of course, the most powerful intellectually, of course, and sometimes morally, will win. But in a place like Nigeria, it is not always so. And because of this, we discover that this system of forceful sharing of resources was introduced from the beginning in Nigeria, even by the colonial powers, and it has continued to operate in Nigeria after then. And it has progressed, or let's say regressed, instead of progressing into other capitalism, because people have been equitably educated, equitably empowered, so they would progress into a stable socialist state or a stable capitalist state. No, it has regressed. And what we are seeing is the introduction of necromancy to ensure that equity, in the sharing of resources. And in this, it tends to create an unmanageable system, okay, where I've done it on other videos too. The rich are becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer. Why? Because the rich control the sources of production and the sources of that distribution, the methods by which these resources are distributed. And so the rich becoming richer, the poor becoming poorer. So this is what the emphasis that I want to touch on in this very edition. Okay, let us round up like this. The issue is on woke ideology, false parity, okay, affirmative action that leads to the creation of a certain group of people who don't really value such privilege and so abuse it, okay, and so people are forced to look again. Are we sure we don't want a meritocracy? Okay, so these are some of the things, okay. Of course, we know that diversity makes the pressures of leadership less hectic, okay, where there is delegation, okay, delegation of responsibility, okay, wisdom is engaged, and when there is delegation of responsibility, of course, there is some kind of parity or equity that is established, okay. But when resources cannot be properly weighed according to their value or their ability to produce wealth, and so are equated with on the same pedestal, like let's say somebody writes a book and that person is expected to bring the same yearly income as a person who manufactures a car, that kind of thing. You see that there is it's not very true, okay. So that is the problem that we find in a system that is operated through necromancy, because necromancy is not scientific. It does not respect scientific rules, and so cannot judge or cannot govern in a world where physical things are what dictate the economy of the people. And so this is what is at stake. So the woke ideology loses its strength in this very system, okay? And this is why we have seen it. The Democrats in the United States lost heavily to Trump because they were doing this. They were weighing things falsely, okay, on a false balance, okay? And this is what the woke ideology does. It's not able to weigh things correctly, okay? It gives false judgments, false imaginations, and so creates the problems that we see, okay? So this is what we're talking about. So the politics of unity, to round up, what have I been saying? The politics of unity is not less complicated than any other way of running a nation. It is as complicated as every other way of running a nation. That means you have to look at the economics. You have to look at the science. There are some sciences that don't bring money, but they are very valuable, they are very important, okay, to keep a nation stable. Let's talk about the arms race. For instance, I hate talking about this, but the arms race. A lot of countries hardly go to war, but they spend a lot on making weapons, even though it's just about 1% or 2% of their yearly budget, okay? So you see how important it is, because of course they cannot have a strong economy without showing people that I can defend myself if you attack me, okay? So there are certain things you invest in that don't necessarily, there are certain things that we invest in that don't really bring profits, okay? If you insist that buying arms or manufacturing arms should bring profit, you get into killing people. And this is what we see. The military industrial problem, okay? People invest into the military and they want profit out of it, and so they create artificial wars. So complex, what you call the military industrial complex, okay? So this is the problem. There are things you invest in that don't really, like you invest in education. Sometimes education does not bring immediate results. It takes time, and you begin to see exponential results, okay? You invest sometimes in moral education. Moral education, like religion, sometimes doesn't show results immediately, but it does not even show any results when you talk about the science, okay? But remove it and you begin to see why you should have invested in moral education, okay? So this is the problem that I want us to really take note of, okay? In the politics of unity, there are many things that are involved. In the politics of unity, you have to be well taught, well educated. It doesn't have to be the Western education, but it has to be well thought out, well developed, scientifically developed, and that is the only way you can progress as a people, as a nation. If you go out of the science, if you go out of the knowledge base, you invite anarchy. And that's what is happening when you talk about this rotational presidency that is developing. Our society is regressing. Okay, in Africa, our society is regressing because we look down on the development of our educational system, of our moral system, okay? I don't have to lead. We see it happening even in some countries. We see some billionaires in other countries insisting that they must be in government. Why? Because they too are being affected by the regression in moral, in morality all over the world, okay? You don't have to be in government to be a leader. And that is the problem. That is the problem. Sometimes, yes, you do have to send a representative into government to help, because you are backing the government. Yes, it's not a hard and fast rule. But when you insist that you must have power, sometimes you might lose it instead. It happened to a former president of this country. His name was Babangida. He was ruling, he was succeeding. And because he was succeeding, he still wanted to transit from a military president to a civilian president. He had to be forced to be, convinced that it would not work. his predecessor, his successor that wanted to do this died on the throne for whatever reason. So this is the problem, okay? We see also somebody like Obasanjo. Obasanjo did 2 successful terms, and it seemed logical he had to do a third one, okay? He had 2 choices: either put an experienced person, maybe Buhari, or maybe his vice Atiku, in a place of power. Instead, he chose to put somebody he could control, and the country deteriorated into anarchy after he left. Okay, a few 4 years after he left, the person he put was too weak, didn't have the military clout, and so the country went into anarchy. Of course, the country is still there, but we see the results. So it is a deliberate system of wisdom. You keep on churning the wisdom. You keep on talking to yourself. Keep on thinking. People have to make sacrifices. You've been there for a while. Let somebody else take over. And the final thing I'm going to talk about is the age system. All over the world, you see older people getting back into power. Why? Because they don't trust the younger people coming in. They believe that the world is a kind of a balance. They believe if they give power to these younger people, they will go to war. Okay, because the younger people are very emotional. They are very, very ideological. Okay, and so it's a problem. Do you give them the power? Do you hold it? If you hold it, will it help? Look at the Biden situation. Did it help Biden? No, it didn't. Okay, and so it is something that you have to continue. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. You have to continue to churn. Sometimes people have to just sacrifice power for the sake of the common good. Because there are many leaders out there. There are many people that you can back and support, and they will do a good job. Look at what Tinubu is doing. People are criticizing Tinubu, but let me tell you what Tinubu is doing is working, and that is why he's raising a lot of feathers. I'm sorry to say it, okay? It's working, because this is what we said should be done since 2012 when Jonathan was in power. But Jonathan was frustrated because of ambitions. That is my analysis. It was ambitions that frustrated Jonathan. Because if Jonathan had succeeded in what he was doing, he would have succeeded. He would have been popular, and others wanted to come and do. So I believe that we have a lot to learn. I am David Ndichinke for you today in Searching the Heart.
Discover a transformative journey into the kingdom of heaven. Following the initial publication, the author dives deeper with 2 insightful follow-up books. Ever felt disconnected from God even in worship? Explore how God's unconventional ways can transform your life. How can you align with divine plans, avoiding distractions? Find answers in The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth and The 3, Illuminating Christian Truths and Prophetic Practices. Unlock profound insights guiding you toward a deeper connection with God. Don't miss out. Dive into this enlightening exploration today. Click the link on the caption to get your copy.